All right.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had some time to chat with each other and talk about this first keynote session. Wasn't Richard fantastic? Let's get some reactions from everybody. Get those reactions going. I just want to let you know there was a book that Richard mentioned in his session. That was the Thinking Fast and Slow book. And for those of you who are members of our ATD chapter, remember you have Percipio as a benefit, Skillsoft Percipio, and that book is available in both audio format and book summary. And I know, I think Chris is, Waylon from Skillsoft is on the call. And so Chris, if you would put into chat the links for those two books for everybody, we would love to have you go out and check Percipio and look up those books. You don't have to go out to Amazon and buy it now. You can go out to the Percipio library. And anybody who is not a member of the chapter, this is a good reason to join. I mean, I've saved hundreds of dollars by utilizing our Percipio account through our ATD chapter. If you want to find out more about this, you can go out to our website. Also, Kent Nuttall is on the call, and he'd be happy to share that information, or anyone from our membership team would happy to help you and to get you involved with that. I see Amy Hart on the call here as well, and Amy would be happy to help you. So without further ado, we're going to get started with our next session. Our speaker is Duncan Welder. He is the Director of Client Services at Risk, and he is, I would say, pretty much as much of a geek as I am for technology. He spent a lot of time learning management systems. I've known him like for many years, and he has done work domestically and abroad, travels a lot, and does a lot of work with regulatory compliance. Now, Duncan is an XAPI evangelist, and he has done also a lot of work in instructional design and e-learning, and he is a well-versed presentation. He and I travel the circuit together, speaking for the Learning Guild and also for ATD. So I am thrilled to have Duncan here. And just to let you know, Duncan is a member of our ATD community and has been a supporter and has helped us as a volunteer in the past. And we also have Ann Wynn on the call, who is also with Risk, and she is heavily involved in our social media. So Duncan, we are thrilled to have you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That's one of the kindest introductions I have ever had. I should probably quit while I'm ahead, pretend we're having technical difficulties. No, seriously, like Debbie said, my name is Duncan Welder. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here as part of the ATD Houston Technology Conference today. Before I even jump into my presentation, I wanted to give a thanks to Richard as well for kicking things off this morning. It was stimulating and good, and it's always fun to sit through a presentation where you go, oh yeah, we'll continue to build on that. Oh yeah, we'll continue to build on that. So there would be some recurring themes that happened there. It made me think back to first internship out of grad school and printing those Gagne's 9 principles of learning on the wall, where I need to capture someone's attention, and I need to stimulate some previous recall, and I need to help generalize and reinforce that learning. So I thought it was all very, very good and good way to start the morning. What I was going to start with this morning is a discussion about adopting a remote first mindset for training. Disruption is inevitable, right? This happens everywhere on large and small scales. Clearly, over the past few years, we've seen the impact of COVID-19 that brought travel and face-to-face meetings, conferences, all to a grinding halt, classroom instruction as well in a lot of cases. More recently, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I personally know a friend, a programmer from Lviv that stayed close in communication as he and his family exiled to Romania and flew to Canada before landing in Mexico City. And in talking about this, horrible situation that I can't really get my own mind around, he said, well, I was offline for 2 days. I'm like, you went through one of the biggest traumas ever, and you only missed 2 days of work about it. And it's because they had already been focused so much on working in that remote first mindset. So while global pandemics and acts of war are clearly big and vivid examples, what there also are a lot more subtle changes that impact our need to consider remote workers as well. First, the workforce itself is just more actively mobile. We have improved, consistent internet access, moving more to a utility from being a luxury like it was in the past. There's the huge proliferation of smart devices. And I personally feel like the newer focus on work-life balance has also really helped guide us to considering what we can do to have a more equitable split, whether I'm working a primary job or at a primary job, and sideline kind of gig economy work. Those learners still need to be supported wherever they are, whatever time zone, anywhere around the world. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I wanted to ask a couple poll questions just really to get our stage set here. So I'm going to hit share, and you don't have to look at me anymore on the screen. Ta-da, I really did have a title slide. If you weren't expecting to be at the ATD Houston Tech Conference today, please ring your flight attendant's call button. But getting started, and really just to level set a bit, the question that I had or want to start off with is, what is your current work arrangement? And I'd love to use the chat for getting some responses here. Are you working remote? Are you in an office environment? Do you have some kind of hybrid where you might be in some days, out some other days? Yeah. It looks like a lot of A's and C's. We've got some B's in there, which I'd, kind of expect. The other half of that question is, is this the same thing you were doing 2 years ago? Were you still working in that same environment, or is this something that is a new change? And a bit of a split there. I'm clearly not tabbing all these up to come up, but it does sound, well, and now it looks pretty consistently like there are a lot of folks that over the last year really have changed their method of getting into work and how they're accessing those things. So I'll start with just a bit of a story. A while back, a friend of mine and I were talking about the impact of mobile devices on instructional design. And her statement was that in the desktop days, where we kind of grew up as designers, we designed training assuming that someone was going to be in a classroom or they were going to be sitting in front of a desktop computer, and you might have a contingency if the internet went out or something, but you were essentially considered tied to that machine as you're working on your design. Now, since we are more free of that desktop computer limitation, we can take better advantage of new technologies and go back to our instructional design roots and explore what we should be doing, or what are we capable of doing now that we have all this rich access to technology that simply didn't exist before. So what we're going to do this morning, we're going to chat a little bit about XAPI, just a very quick tangent there, to make sure we're all on the same field. But I won't get technical on that side. If you want to geek out with me, by all means, this is one of my favorite things to do. So reach out, and we can definitely make that happen. But we're also going to talk about building complex skills, and then run through a whole series of case studies from different companies that have started to look at ways of really using remote learning as a way to, as a primary front for attacking training problems versus using it as an afterthought or a contingency if and when someone had a problem getting into work. While we're doing that, and as we get started here, I wanted to pose one more question, and then leave this one very, very open-ended. I'd love to know some of the ways that you or your organizations have leveraged technology to support learning, and especially remote learning there. I'm going to just drop that out there, and however you want to trickle responses into the chat, that would be fantastic. Piggyback on somebody else's ideas, and we'll circle back towards the end of there. So I did warn you, I want to give you a very high level and non-technical overview of XAPI very quickly, because I'm going to mention it a few times. But please know, again, I'm glad to chat about this in greater detail. For our purposes today, XAPI is just a standard for recording learning activities using data, right? It was developed as an ADL project, just like SCORM, and now has become adopted by the IEEE as an international standard. You can kind of think of XAPI as a Twitter activity stream that just writes data about a learner. The real design, one of the big drivers behind that, was to move away from that instructor to student dynamic of either in a classroom or on online training, and to start looking at data that's outside what I'm going to call the SCORM Big Four, right? Completion, duration, score, satisfaction. When you start looking at other things that really impact learning. Because XAPI was designed as a data standard, it also promises middleware-free interoperability between applications, and gives us the chance to start gathering information from other systems, not just what we think of as a content module, but things like software applications, performance support tools, mobile applications, simulators, AR and VR. One of the things that's unique about XAPI is the whole specification never mentions a learning management system. XAPI statements get written to a learning record store, where SCORM was really a standard at that time, very early 2000s, to have content and learning management systems speak to one another. So the basis of XAPI is what we call statements, where you have this active verb object. So Duncan launched a course. Duncan answered true to question 1. Duncan uploaded a picture, because that's one of the things that the spec allows me to do, is to include attachments there. We'll take a look at some of that later. And that information can be extended. So it could be that, Duncan satisfied course X as part of a cohort using Google Chrome with 90%. Now, again, this is very, very basic, but what it's really doing is it's giving me the option to decide what data I want to capture and what I'm going to do with that data, because all of that information that I write to a learning record store, assuming I have the credentials, I can read and take some kind of action on that data. And that's one of those benefits that we'll revisit a couple times as we move through. So with that, I will not beach up too much more on the XAPI side. I did want to just close the idea with this thought of, what does XAPI really push us to ask? It's, what can we do in designing learning to make better decisions? How do we avoid getting locked into a solution because we don't have good interoperability? How can I connect all the things my learners do, not just the things that they interact with inside a learning management system? So again, Didn't want to get too deep there, but felt like I'd be remiss if I didn't provide some background. So while XAPI is young, in my mind, it offers a huge number of opportunities that we've just not had in the past. And if there are additional questions there, feel free to drop those into the chat or follow up with me as well. But let's get right over into actually learning or training. So what is a skill? One easy guide is to ask yourself if you can become proficient at a task without any practice, right? So, I can turn on a light switch. That's really not a skill. It's a basic task. You could write a job instruction. I could go through that without having to synthesize a lot of data, have some analysis there. Those are the kind of simple tasks that a lot of times we can automate because they follow the same pattern every time. They're repeatable without additional analysis. That's different with complex skills. So with things like sports, you have to practice. We recognize that. So I article in the Journal of Human Medicine where professors from Greece published a paper on essentially free throw practice. So could people, these are already trained or are proficient basketball players, improve their free throw abilities by having some different types of practice, some of those visualizations, some of those actually throwing the balls. What they found is the accuracy of any of those folks that practiced improved their scores by about 20% over the control group that did not change their practice schedules. So I steal this from my friend Julie Dirksen in her book, Design for How People Learn. She says, we normally recognize that people need to have practice and feedback in sports, in music, and things that can kill you. And we take a lot of time making sure we're well trained there. But I like to take a step, half a step back at least, and say, what about the hobbies? Not that your hobbies can't be sports, music, or things that kill you, but hobbies are a great way to think about how we develop skills naturally. We have an interest, we learn a little bit of information, we practice, we fail, we continue to expand our skills, we learn from our mistakes. Why is that so different than how we deliver information in a normal work environment or classroom environment? Far too often, we're delivering information and expecting someone to apply information to develop a skill. I don't want to overgeneralize. There are certainly classes that practice skills, role playing or simulation that we'll talk about a bit later. There might even be an actual performance review, right? Like I need to use the resuscitation Annie doll to practice CPR to make sure I'm qualified at the end of that first aid class. But even in those cases, if I don't practice those skills, what's my proficiency going to be like when the time comes? The only thing I can ever remember about CPR is that you use the BG staying alive beat to maintain 100 beats per minute for chest compressions. Outside of that, I'm hoping somebody else has better skills than me that is around when I'm in that situation. So what does it take to build a skill? Well, first, we have to have memory, right? And the ability to build on some kind of prior knowledge rather than having some kind of new information floating out in the ether. It takes practice, it takes feedback, both of which we talked about before, but that practice has to be correct. And that's why timely feedback is important. And this is one of those challenges that is exacerbated by having a remote workforce. I have a good friend that has probably told me a half dozen times the story of her high school band director that said, practice doesn't make perfect, only perfect practice makes perfect. And as much as this gives me an automatic dislike for this band director, they're absolutely not wrong, right? So I need to be able to shape that behavior early in the process of someone solidifying it into their memory and building habits around it if I need to move that in a different direction or have some kind of performance improvement. Because we have all of this stimulus coming in regularly that we have to be able to focus our attention on the task at hand if we're really going to build a memory or build a habit. So that means paring back some of the stimulus coming in when we are new at developing a skill, minimizing some of that interference and distraction, keeping that cognitive load down to a level that we can manage. As a foundation of understanding and beginning for skills to grow, I need to take on more and more stimulus because I already do have that foundation, that baseline knowledge, and those simple tasks in the skill can begin to move to an automated part of my mind. We don't have to focus on them near as much. If any of you are like me and learn to drive on a standard transmission, I will still, if I'm deep in thought, move my left foot for the clutch that hasn't existed in my car in years now, because that's just part of my my inherent muscle memory there. I think everyone has the experience of remember first driving, where you had both hands on the wheel and whatever you were in, a little bit of gas, a little bit of brake going through, and it didn't take very long for you to be able to drive, one-handed while changing the radio and rolling down the window. So a lot of those things that are really complicated at first, we have to push all those distractions away, and then we can really begin to build a foundation without getting overwhelmed. It's really much more efficient if your path isn't straight uphill as you go to build a skill, but has those peaks and valleys. And I like borrowing the cycle of expertise term from game design. Now, it's not unique there and has been around prior to that, but the idea of the cycle of expertise begins with providing a simple challenge and the introduction of the skills needed to solve that challenge. The cycle then gets repeated with a new challenge that gets mastered as skills fail to overcome, prompting them to learn new skills. So as we go through this process, it makes me think about Gloria Gary's electronic performance support systems, where she said learning really goes through a series of phases where there's familiarization with content, there's comprehension, so the understanding, there's conscious effort to do something, conscious activity, moving to proficiency, and ultimately to that unconscious competence. So you see on the right side of the screen there, these two PET scans. Oh, sorry, and overly ambitious. These two PET scans, and the difference here is the PET scan on the left-hand side of that shot is someone learning a skill new. And again, this is borrowed from that Julie Dirksen book at the end of the presentation. I have a reference there where the PET scan on the right-hand side shows someone who's performing the same task after they've practiced. So the brain consumes a huge amount of energy, right? This is mostly looking at glucose consumption. So brain is in there eating lots of sugars as I'm practicing something for the first time. And as I gain skill, gain proficiency, then it takes a lot less work for me to perform that same task. So we have learners and they have a particular skill level, and we have a desired skill level that we want to get to. So again, thinking about the things that I need to look at when I am analyzing a skill. How long does it take to acquire? Is it something explicit that I can see and touch, or is it something that I have to understand more conceptually? There are also a couple variability items. I can have tasks or skills that allow a lot of variability in the performance. I might be able to do the same task multiple ways with the same outcome. I also have tasks that could have a variability of outcomes, where if I follow the same process, I could get a different outcome. That moves it from one of those things that I can say, yep, it's turning on a light switch, turning off a light switch, versus, okay, what are the other factors that I need to be able to analyze, to bring into my view, to make sure that I do get to the outcome that I need? Of course, we already talked about error tolerance and how things that are skills that could kill you, sports and music, are things that there's just very little error tolerance in. So we have to train to a higher level. And one of the things that drives that, of course, is frequency of use. It's very dangerous for me to drive a car across Houston every day, but I do it every day. So I don't feel the need to go in for refresher training once a month on how to operate a vehicle. So again, all those things that we look at as we say, what are these particular skills and how are we going to help get someone from their current level to that higher skill level? The thing that we run into now, though, with remote learners is it's not going just straight up the hill. We have a gap there, and that extra challenge really comes from resourcing, geography, time, and technology. So what are those extra challenges that we have to overcome in really taking a remote first focus? What we're going to do is look at several companies and examples of projects that they have employed over the last couple or few years that they can use for supporting learners, not only during times of disruption, but to better deliver training throughout regular times, normal times, through the application of technology. So what are some of the ways that we can reduce that gap, minimize that burden? Well, one of those is spaced learning. And again, this is when I very often borrow from the marketing side of the world too, because they do it very, very well. Spaced learning is just the delivery of small, repetitive learning experiences. Each one of those needs to be separated by some period of time, and that can vary. But each new element needs to reinforce what happened before and build new information, because that's what's proven to improve learning retention. Again, one of my marketing examples is moving a couple years ago and getting a new television service provider. And I get an email the next day that thanks me for joining, and email a couple days later that says, hey, have you explored these new features of your voice controlled remote? And then the next day or two, there's a message that says, hey, did you know that you could search this way or that way? So they didn't try to give me a manual for operating my remote control. They gave me tiny nuggets of information out over time. And if in that case, I'd been diligent about looking at the intermediate steps, they've, I assume, continued to build. The way you can see these kind of skills develop is taking a look at this this learning curve and forgetting curve. I often see this image in different iterations where it's really just cut off all talking about forgetting. But in spaced learning, one of the things that we have to look at is how do we build that initial bit of information compared to how we would in a very normal kind of classroom or online training event, where if I look at that lighter orange line, I have a very steep learning curve where I get information. All right, proficient. And then if I follow that curve back down on the right side of that forgetting line, you see that my information, that knowledge degradation happens very, very quickly. With space learning, I have to have a longer lead up, right? So if I can start back earlier and slowly build skills, slowly build understanding, slowly build some kind of competence, when I hit the point of of approval, I'm competent in this task, even if I don't have any other learning interventions, then you'll see that the degradation in that purple line is much slower. Not that that's what I want to do, but I would prefer it to be this flat over as steep as that normal forgetting curve is. And what I really want to stretch towards is even after training. Let me get up into this area that Will Thalmeyer calls the reactivation curve, where hey, let me get a little bit more information after training, a little bit more information, something that continues pushing that forgetting curve up. Any activity that re-engages following the learning will continue to help solidify those neural networks. The other thing before I move off of this slide, there's a study that I don't have an image of here, but just wanted to talk about, that came from Training Magazine. I think they had 1,200 students that were surveyed, and they looked at our training providers that were surveyed, and they looked at the amount of spend that we have on with learning events. And they found that about 10% of training events, you spend money on the pre-event stuff, the coordination and all of that. The event itself makes up normally about 85% of the training cost, and about 5% is the post-class consideration. And when they started analyzing the value of that training, they said, really, that 5% that you're spending after the fact contributes almost 50% to the learning process. So you can improve your retention by, as much as 50% by having a formal post-training program, rather than spending all of your money on delivering a training and then saying, all right, great, turn in your evaluations, and then I slide right down this dark orange line and forget. So if we know this works, we say, why haven't we done it? Well, there are some groups that have been doing this for a number of years in different ways, right? Sending out emails, sending out articles, sending out surveys with post-training follow-up. All of those things help reactivate that learning. But some of the problems have been tracking, management. Development is very different if I'm going to build out small bites of training like this over building, a single event. Then there's been the issue with infrastructure and interoperability, right? I could have built a system to do this in the past, but it wouldn't work with anybody else's system, right? Because there wasn't a standard for saving that kind of data. What we had is a group here in Houston that came to us with a challenge. They had about 6,000 supervisors that were all across the U.S. They were developing a series of 23, 25 online leadership development programs for them. They're very short. They're being developed in Rise, so they're already compatible for a mobile screen. They believed they had an infrastructure that was solid, and it mostly was. But one of the challenges that they had is that their employees hated their LMS, and they said, if we try to make someone log into the LMS to take this training, this whole initiative fails. Again, these are normally a person in a truck with a toolbox someplace, any place, that would have to go back to a hotel and open up a laptop and take training, and they just weren't having it. So what we did is said, okay, we can beat this. So instead of having their output of RISE, their publish option, go to SCORM that requires an LMS, they simply change the output format to XAPI that doesn't. Then we set up a mailer that would send the user a link directly to a content module using a SMS message. Now, because behind the scenes, the LMS knows who needs to take course 1 today and course, who needs to take course 5 today and all of those things. It has the student information, and that mailer just embeds a token into that link that goes out in the SMS so that the person just hits the link, they go directly into the content. The content is writing back and forth to the learning record store. And when they finish this 3-minute, 5-minute, 7-minute piece of content and close it, the LRS receives the completion information that flows over to the LMS, and it can then go in and say, oh, you passed module 5 today. There needs to be a 7-day wait period, and then we'll deliver module 6. So again, one of those things that would have been much more difficult and would have been really a standalone application if it was something that we couldn't use XAPI for. From their standpoint, they were super happy because nobody had to log into anything, right, outside of unlocking your own cell phone. The other thing that I found interesting is that, and this is purely anecdotally, I did not have a scientifically designed control group or anything, but I found that people finished training about 2/3 as quickly when they were receiving those messages via text versus going through and receiving an email, because we did have a small group that opted out of the text messages there. So in addition to space learning to help support that remote workforce, there's some significant challenges also with simulators. So I don't think anybody at this point is going to say that don't realize that simulators can be valuable in a training arena. I think most everyone agrees that it's a powerful capability to allow someone to control the schedule of practice, presentation of feedback, introducing new distractors or problems, or maybe suppressing those if someone is early in their process. From a safety standpoint, I came out of the refining industry and over to Risk 21 years ago. So before that, we had different things. We ran for 5 years in between shutdowns. So if someone is working a normal shift, they may go their entire career without seeing some pieces of equipment physically shut down or restart. So simulators were super important in that situation. If I need to cold at 3 a.m. without finding or phoning a friend, make some kind of reaction. So in the past, simulators largely ran as these separate dedicated appliances, computers using different interfaces and control systems. And that means that learners traditionally had to travel to the simulator. Simulator training also often required communication between the learners, right? I have a pilot and a co-pilot that have to speak to each other while going through a flight simulator. In that refinery scenario, I have an inside and outside operator that need to be able to communicate with each other. AR and VR, we talked about in the keynote, is something that has really helped shift the focus of simulators, right? So now instead of maybe a room size simulation, I can work with something wearable. That's one way XAPI has been helpful. My partner actually presented last week at the Learning Solutions Conference on coding XAPI into Unity projects. And I've got a link to that at the end of this presentation if you are doing any kind of Unity development. But the other thing that I thought was really creative as a technology solution that evolved over the past couple of years was virtualizing simulators. In the power generation industry, I tend to work a good bit. And there are power plants that make electricity and feed it to a grid, and then the grid operators that distribute that electricity. Not at all that easy. As a matter of fact, I often find it frightening the more I think about it and how fragile that whole network is. But they have these massive simulation exercises that are required by law, where you have employees from all of the different power generators that are brought in, and at the same time working with grid operators. So they would rent out a hotel ballroom and have 80 simulators, 15 wandering instructors, and 100 and 125 students on site for a couple weeks at a time. Well, when suddenly you couldn't have those kind of events anymore, what do you do? What the East Coast grid operator did was to virtualize all their simulators. So in their LMS, an administrator can schedule a particular course. For that simulator course, there's a unique image, computer image with that simulator loaded to it and saved online. He or she enters the number of attendees. Virtual machines are started up. That image is loaded to them. A link is emailed out to students and the instructor with credentials to access the simulator. And at the end of the session, all of the virtual machines are reformatted and shut down. So the amount of processor time that they're paying for is very, very low. Travel's eliminated. Instructors can monitor each of the individual students using monitor each of the students using an application that's on that instructor machine, where they can take control of a screen. They can wipe out a screen or black out a screen. So again, not as much XAPI heavy, but definitely taking a look at a unique application of technology there. So with that, I was going to take a look at one more technique here, as I know I'm pushing time more than I should be. But two of the challenges with remote work are providing that timely feedback, as well as documenting evidence that someone is competent. The U.S. Marines and the Park Service are both using XAPI to overcome this challenge. And what I'm seeing is that some of this is being done more in the private sector as well. Again, remember, XAPI doesn't need an LMS, so I can use a mobile app to upload a picture of my performing a task or videotaping a procedure that lets me go in and provide evidence of training. So this product is Pebble Pro. It's the one that's made by EdgeWorks. It's the one that the Marines and the Park Service are using. And because their students are very geographically spread. This happens to be a screenshot from a creating constructive conversations class, and it gives some instruction and says, hey, you should upload a picture of yourself performing this task. So whether the students are all in the same room or they're working remotely in some kind of asynchronous cohort, they can comply with that. So Judy here has uploaded a video of herself leading a conversation. When authoring in the tool, you can decide if you want to have submissions that are private to an instructor or submissions that can be shared to all the other students in your group, and get feedback from them as well. So I can increase some engagement and collaboration amongst those learners. So now once she's made that upload, I have a few different ways of getting feedback to that person immediately, right? There's the idea that I could self-assess, right? Watch my own video and self-assess, or I can have feedback from the instructor and feedback from the students coming in. And all of that is capable in this case because of XAPI and allowing us to upload the file, sharing feedback, because that feedback's being written to a learning record store by one person's content, and then the next person is logging in and can read that person's comments or content there, documenting the competency and like I mentioned, maintaining engagement there. And so, and final item I wanted to just touch on here, because XAPI has a great provides us a great opportunity to explore more of the capabilities of adaptive learning, which I think everyone has been aware of for a long time. This is where my activities, my earlier performance, those kind of things could shape the path that I take inside a content module. So adaptive learning is good for helping a student maintain that balance between boredom and frustration, where, okay, I'm done with this, or I don't understand and I'm throwing my hands up. And that's why the US Department of Education is investing so heavily in their National Technology Plan for adaptive learning. One of the other benefits that they recognize there is it really helps level the performance amongst students that are, especially students that are English as a second language versus native English speakers, and covering the same content there. So again, lots of examples there. I see Debbie's face has alighted, so that means that I am probably right at the end of my time. Is that right? I'll reach over. Yeah. So in summary, let me bounce over and I'll just show you a quick wrap up here. And oh, well, I killed my slide sharing, but I'll get back to that. So here in wrapping up, I wanted to reframe that first question and say, what does XAPI or what does this new technology really give us the freedom to ask, instead of what is it pushing us to ask? How can we be more learner centric? What data do we need to have shared between systems? What kind of support do we need to ensure adoption? So again, this is one of those things I am glad to go on and on about. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I will go ahead and wrap up there. But if there are any questions, I'm glad to take those after as well. I am super easy to find, Duncan W. at risk-inc.com. Just a quick special thanks to what I think is some of my primary contributors, Julie Dirksen, Will, Judy, Art, and again, I'll make sure that this slide deck is available with all of the resources there.